Hi Lorenzo. We're just waiting for a few people to join the webinar. I can see everyone joining. So hello everyone, welcome. I'll just wait a few more minutes. Sorry, we were slightly late starting, just a couple minutes late starting, but we're ready to get going. Right. Okay, well, just while everyone else is joining, just wanted to say welcome. This is Whale Whisperers Week. I hope that some of you have been able to join some of our previous webinars this week. It's so great to be here. As you can probably tell, I'm not Dylan Walker, as was originally planned for this session. My name is Sophie Lewis, and I'm the head of programs for the WCA. And I'm really pleased to be here and to be chatting to Lorenzo today. This is actually our last virtual whale watching trip of Whale Whisperers Week, and I think it's going to be a good one to end on. So we've got Lorenzo here, who's going to be taking us on a trip in the beautiful Azores, and I will hand over to Lorenzo to introduce this session for you.
Thank you so much, Sophie, and for introducing me, and good afternoon to everybody. My name is Lorenzo Fiori, and I'm working at Terra Azul, Azores whale watching since a couple of years now. I hold a PhD on citation and behavioral ecology, and most likely during this virtual trip, you will kind of understand that I have a certain view on the animals, especially looking at their behavior. And today, as Sophie mentioned, I'm going to bring you out on the water in the island of San Miguel in the Azores. We will be departing from Villafranca do Campo, where Terra Azul is actually based. And I just want to try to convey you some different perspective on this kind of activity, not just from the point of view of how we view the animals, as you will see from the imagery and from the sounds, and but also from the point of view of the teamwork that is behind this activity. I'm talking, of course, about the people organizing the trip itself, the skippers, of course, but I want to spend some good words for all the biologists, not just of Terra Azul, but also of other companies that they do an amazing job guiding customers out there and visitors. And they are always trying to update themselves and try to educate and also participate in research. So it's a great job. On top of that, of course, we have also the collaboration from a land team that is typical of the Azorean way to do whale watching, and we will see it in the briefing and also during the trip. So I'm going to just start this trip with a short briefing, shorter version than the one that we use normally. Because of course, every time we need to get out there in the ocean, it's better to start with a proper briefing, understanding a little bit more about the animals and how the activity is run. Start sharing the screen now. And
just so you all know, we're going to be doing a debriefing after Lorenzo's great trip as well. So if you have any questions at all or any comments, please just pop them in the Q&A box at the bottom and we'll get to those at the end. And Lorenzo will kindly answer any of your questions and comments.
I will be glad to, if I have the answer, of course. Sometimes questions are a bit tricky. So as I say before, we always start with a briefing, and here we can see an overview of the many cetacean species that are possible to be sighted in the Azores. Here you have 24 of them. There are a few other ones that can be sighted, but they are really, really rare sightings. And you already understand there is a huge biodiversity in terms of baleen whales and toothed cetaceans, as you can see. And we are quite lucky because we can also see some species that we consider sort of resident, even if this term we have to take it not in the ecological way. Of course, in the open ocean, there are no boundaries. We already know that most of these animals, some of these animals have been sighted also in other islands, in other areas. But let's say that we can spot them all year long. So we have 3 species of dolphins, common dolphins, bottlenose dolphin, and rhesus dolphins, and of course the iconic species of the Azores, the sperm whales. You already understand that we have access to some animals that are normally living in very deep waters. So they prefer to stay where the continental shelf drops. And this is the reason is because waters here around the island are pretty deep. To give you an example, just a couple of miles southeast of Villafranca, we already have 1,000 meters of water under the boat. So that's why we have sperm whales and rhesus dolphin quite close to the shores. And speaking of deep diving species, I cannot not mention the beaked whales. We can spot actually 6 different species in San Miguel and the Azores. And in particular, we have a quite good record of sightings of Sowerby's beaked whale and Blayville beaked whale, especially in this side of the island, I have to say. Of course, these animals, they spend most of their life at depth. You might know that, for example, Cuvier beaked whale is the record holder for the deepest and the longest dive. I think recently got recorded 3 hours and 45 minutes dive, and in the past reaching even the depth of 3,000 meters. So it's really a matter of luck to spot these animals, but once again, we have a good record of sightings. So hopefully in this virtual trip, we're gonna have a glimpse on these animals. Spoilers ahead. And then we have rare sightings. Those are really rare, like orcas, for example. Yes, it's true. A few days ago, we spotted them, but they are totally unpredictable. We have on average 1-2 sightings a year. So this probably is not the right place to go and wish to observe these animals. But together with them, we have other kind of sightings that are more frequent. We call them occasional sightings, are not predictable. There is no really a season for them. And I mean, especially striped dolphin, short-finned pilot whale, and false killer whales. False killer whales, actually, we had several encounters this past winter, and also during the past year, even during the lockdown, our lookouts and land spotters were able to spot them quite frequently. So again, they're not predictable, but there is the chance to see them. And finally, of course, we are in spring, and spring is the best time of the year in the Azores and San Miguel to observe baleen whales. In particular, blue whales and fin whales and also humpback whales are regularly sighted during the months of April, May. Sei whales, they tend to appear around the islands more towards the summer, and actually there is the chance to see them also during the autumn. However, as any biologist on this island probably will tell you in a briefing, this activity is really unpredictable, and we are in a very unpredictable environment. So we never really know what we're going to find out there. And in particular, it's a really dynamic environment. So we might have a big difference in the species that we can see even between 1 hour and another one. Some animals can approach the islands, other one can leave the area, or some can dive really deep for a long time. So it's really a matter of being out there and trying our best to find the animals. And we are not alone in this job. As I said before, we are a good example, I believe, as companies here in the Azores, team working, because we have a land team. We have people like Philippe here and Nicole that works as lookout, or vigias, as they are called in Portugal. And their job is to be on the top of the cliffs of the island. You can see in the yellow markers where we normally operate our vigias, and observe the ocean with powerful optics. They have radio and a compass, and they will be with us. Actually, right now, if we would be departing for a trip, it would be already 1 hour. They are searching the ocean for animals. And I like to remember that they are our continuation of the legacy of the whaling activity back in the days, because they are basically working in the same way pretty much, and in the same places where whalers were sitting when the hunt of sperm whales was still going on in the islands. So they do an amazing job up there, and it's good to acknowledge them for this great effort. Finally, I'm going to present really briefly our fleet. The boats that we use are Zodiacs or Ribs, as you prefer. And these boats are all fitted with hydrophones. that are connected to the stereo system of the boat itself. So if there is the chance, good weather condition and animals, and potentially we can drop the hydrophone and listen to their vocalizations. So I will now start the hand over to Sophie to start the video. We are going to try to do it from her computer because we had a little bit of issues with the sound, but hopefully it's going to work.
I'm just gonna stop the video a bit now to point out a couple of things. Of course, you saw the Atlantic Ocean just in front of Villafranca do Campo with our iconic islet, and you probably noticed the vastity of the environment out there. And I guess you understand how hard would it be to find whales and dolphins without the help of vigias or lookouts, as we call them. And another interesting thing, in this particular shot you can observe our fleet, our 3 Terra Azul boats, but also on the left side you can see a canoe style boat, blue and white. It's actually a whaling boat, an original whaling boat restored from 1945 by Terra Azul, and perfectly functional. It can actually sail and row, and is competing in regattas in the islands of Azores, as there are other whaling vessels like this still in activity. Of course, not in whaling activity. So it's kind of nice to see in the same picture the past and the present of our interaction with whales.
Já va caminho da oeste ainda.
Então os caixotes estão a andar bem, é isso que estás a dizer, né?
So the first species that we are encountering in this virtual tour is common dolphins, and these species generally tend to be occurring quite close to the shores of San Miguel, and groups can be between 30-50 animals to gigantic megapods of hundreds and hundreds of them. Actually, this shot from the drone is taken during a research project that is being conducted to look at the social behavior of common dolphins, and you can probably see that there is a little group of 4-5 animals that are attempting to mate and socializing in the footage. Also, we observe them really often foraging, most of the time on different kind of small fish such as sardines and mackerels. And in this moment in which they are foraging, they work up the fish towards the surface, and a lot of seabirds are also taking advantage of this dolphin action, in particular Cornish shearwaters. Before to move to the next sightings, you probably noticed the difference in size of these animals. These are bottlenose dolphins, and actually here in the Azores we can mainly see oceanic bottlenose dolphins, which are way larger than the coastal ecotype. We are talking about almost 4 meters in length and around 600-650 kilos for an adult male. Also, it's interesting to note the difference in vocalization respect to the previous species. In this case, we recorded some vocalization that we noticed that they are producing in a socializing moment. I have to say also that it's very interesting to see bottlenose dolphins interacting with other species such as rhesus dolphin or pilot whales and even sperm whales in some cases. In this other encounter we have rhesus dolphins. They also tend to occur close to the coast in San Miguel, and you can notice the difference in coloration between these individuals. There are two mother and calf pairs, and generally when they are born they are light gray, but they do interact between each other, and they scar each other with bites. These bites, they don't repigment, so with the time they become almost fully white. As you can see, these two mothers, probably one is younger respect to the one that is almost completely white. In San Miguel we also observe several interactions with other species and also with fishermen. You might know that rhesus dolphin prey almost exclusively on cephalopods such as squids, and local fishermen going for squid often have problem with rhesus dolphins because the dolphins learn how to approach the boats, and they wait at depth until they are retrieving the lines, so they can actually have an easy snack, taking away the squid from the hook, sometimes even in the face of the fisherman. So far we have been encountering the dolphin species that we consider resident here in San Miguel and in the Azores. But sometimes it's also possible to encounter other dolphin species that are larger, they are black, and maybe you already guessed what they are. Sometimes we also are lucky to see them in action foraging and feeding, especially on large pelagic fish such as tunas, marlin, like in this case, or swordfish, we are not sure, and mai. I guess you are understanding what we are talking about. These are false killer whales, and you can also appreciate their vocalization. In this particular encounter, they took down and divided between them marlin, and they really act like a pack of wolves, and they tend to arrive in large pods, sometimes 70 or even more than 100. So it's really amazing when we have the chance to witness them. They are quite curious also with the boats.
Vou fazer uma prova de 180 graus, assim com a charuta de 2 milhas à tua frente.
So as you saw, our lookout is keeping searching the ocean for blows and sign of animals, and directed us in the area where we have several sperm whales at the surface. In this particular case you can see a female with a calf that is in a position that might suggest nursing or suckling actually. And normally we encounter females with the youngs, the calves, in groups that we call matriarchal pods. But sometimes we can also have some visiting males that come from northern latitudes to try to look for a chance to breed. And well, as you will see from the footage, the difference in size between a male and a female can be really outstanding. So this is what you normally see at the end of an encounter with some sperm whales at the surface. A deep dive, a fluke up, and the animal generally will be back in about 40-45 minutes. That's the average length of a foraging dive of sperm whales here in the Azores. After a few seconds of the dive, if we put down the hydrophone, we would hear the animal clicking quite regularly in search for squids and other cephalopods to eat. But sometimes it's also possible to see the animals really relaxed, socializing at the surface, and the type of clicks that they produce in this case are completely different. They are sequences that are actually used to socialize with other animals, and these sequences are really important, as you will hear soon. I'm gonna just stop the video right here, as you can actually see pretty much what is going on. This group of females is surrounding this little newborn in the middle of the frame, and you can tell really that is a newborn because of the fluffy tail, these really evident fetal folds, and even the part of the umbilical cord that is still hanging on the belly of the animal. So we're talking about an animal that is probably 1 week or 2 weeks old. And all these clicks that you heard, these repeated sequences, are called codas. So they are almost like the dialect of the whales. If you would go in Sri Lanka or in the Caribbean or in the Pacific or in the Mediterranean, the sperm whales there, they produce different codas. So this is kind of a cultural trait of the whales, something that is not passed through with the DNA, but is passed through generation of whales, pretty much like us. During every encounter, we collect the data for the Monisset database. Monisset was founded around 10 years ago, and it's basically a citizen science project that is taking advantage of the data collected by whale watching operators. And it's completely open access. It allows a researcher and anybody to assess this data and infer distribution and species that can be found here in the Azores. While we move from one area to another area, guided by our lookouts, it's always a good practice to keep your eyes open in the waters of San Miguel, because it's always possible to see some species that are more elusive, more cryptic, and not that our lookout don't spot them, they actually see them quite often. But by the time we would be getting there with the boat, normally these animals are already diving again, and they can stay down there for quite a while. I bet you know that I'm talking about beaked whales, and in this case we're gonna have a little encounter with a small group of Blainville beaked whales. This type of whale has been spotted in the area of Villafranca quite frequently in the last years. And just to give you an idea, in 2019 we had about 20 sightings of beaked whales, of which half of them were confirmed to be Blainville beaked whale. Recently we also started a project, a collaboration with Canary Island and Madeira to look at the potential movements of these whales between the archipelagos. And actually, looking into our pictures, we already photo-identified a female a couple of times between 3 years, right here in front of Villafranca. So maybe they have some sort of site fidelity like they show to have in other islands archipelagos such as Hawaii. And when I say that you should always keep your eyes open, it's also because sometimes we can encounter really rarely seen species, such as in this case. These are true-beaked whales, Mesoplodon mirus, and so far there are around 50 confirmed sightings, including stranded specimens here in the Atlantic. So it's a really rare thing to witness. And actually, I have to say that without the drone this day, it would have been very hard to identify the species without any reasonable doubt. So it's one of the few places, the Azores, where it's actually possible to approach these very elusive creatures of the ocean. And as we move to further offshore waters, we finally encounter baleen whales that are typically passing by Azores during the spring. Here we have fin whales, but it's also possible to observe blue whales, for example, as we will see soon. And the nice thing also is that sometimes we observe them foraging, and other times we can actually observe them involved in some sort of socializing activity, chasing each other at fast speed, even between different species, like fin whales and blue whales, which is kind of particular because we consider these animals to be really solitary, but sometimes they show us that they are quite interested towards each other, probably for reproductive reasons. And as we say goodbye to this gigantic blue whale, I just want to point out how far we are from the islands in the background over there. This animal was spotted just a few days ago, about 15 nautical miles south of Villafranca. And I have to tell you also that our lookouts totally identify the species, even from that crazy distance, just to give you another idea of how brilliant is their work and how good they can spot these animals so far away. Of course, blue whales probably are the easiest one, a blow that is probably around 10 meters tall, but still quite outstanding ability. However, the ocean is not just whales and dolphins. We can always spot some pelagic creature, and in this case we have an encounter with Portuguese man o' war. They are quite abundant during the spring month, especially in offshore waters around the island, and you might know that it's actually a big colony of jellyfish organism with very poisonous tentacles, but still they are on the menu of some other creatures. These are loggerhead turtles, juveniles in particular, and it's quite interesting to know that they are not gonna lay eggs on our islands actually, and they are visiting us. They stay around the Azores for about 15-20 years, but they are actually coming from the east coast of the United States, in particular Florida and South Carolina. That's where they were born, just 4 centimeters long, and leaving the beach, they cannot fight the current, and the Gulf Stream bring them basically to the Azores in about 4 months. When they arrive, they are on average about 8 centimeters long, so they will take many years to grow to this size, and when they reach sexual maturity, they tend to go back more or less in the beach where they were born. We have to thank actually the University of Florida to finding out this. For many years it was a kind of a mystery because they could only see the adults crawling on the beach to lay eggs and the little one leaving the beach, but they couldn't find where the juveniles were. They were actually in the Azores. And as we are about to go back to land, after greeting our viziers, we give a quick round of the islet of Villafranca. It's also called the Princess Ring, actually, for the typical shape of the crater. It is a volcanic island, a Surtesian island, originated about 4,000 years ago, and it's actually a protected area, which is really important for a number of seabirds that are nesting on the island. So on the top of the cliffs we have a very densely populated colony of cory shearwaters. These amazing birds that are actually coming back every February and March from their wintering ground in South Africa to nest in the Azores. About 75% of their world population actually nest in the Azores, so it's really our iconic species of seabirds. And they do lay a single egg, they are monogamous, and they live long lives. Just to give you an example, last year an individual was found dead on a South African beach with a ring from the Azores dating back about 30 years. This success for this islet is due to the work of the Society for the Study of Birds here in Portugal that eradicated all the predators on the island. So now the island is predator free since a few years, and together with the increase of the numbers, we are talking about around 500 occupied nests on the island of cory shearwaters. We also had the return of some species that were kind of extinct in San Miguel, such as the Madeiran store petrel that is nesting on the islet during the winter month. The colony is about 60 individuals, is growing, so it's a nice story of success. And as far as we know, is actually the only known colony of Madeiran store petrel in San Miguel.
Thanks so much, Lorenzo. That was such a fantastic trip and treated the technical difficulties like a true pro. So yeah, congratulations for that, and apologies for those technical difficulties to yourself and the other guests on board today. But I hope you all enjoyed it. It was some really fascinating information you provided. I think we can all say that we want to go to the Azores straight away if you haven't already been, as soon as travel opens up. It's such a special place, both geology wise, culturally wise, and obviously, of course, the flora and fauna too. Such a special place, and your guiding really brought that to life, which is what it's all about. So thank you again for that. So I'm going to go to the Q&A. Again, if you have any questions that you'd like Lorenzo to answer, or if you have any general questions, then please put it in the Q&A box and we'll do our best to answer those questions. And Lorenzo, I've got one here from Victor, and Victor says, is it possible to be a volunteer or do internships in Terra Azul? You're on mute, Lorenzo.
Yes, it is possible during the summer month, and we were running an internship program in past years. At the moment, I suggested to get in touch with our management, and you can find all the information on AzoresWhaleWatch.com to get in touch with us. Either though, I have to say that with the current situation, of course, in 2020, we stopped that program because of the travel restriction and all the problems that we were going through, of course, with tourism. So yes, it's totally possible. And just send a resume.
Thanks, Lorenzo. I bet you'll be inundated with them now after this. Great. And we've got another one coming through from Tasha. Tasha says, how does the weather affect your trips out? And is it possible to go out all year round?
That's a very good question. When I was mentioning the unpredictability of the environment, the weather is a big factor, of course. Let's say that during the summer, we have quite stable conditions. And in the spring, like right now, for example, it can be really variable, but we manage to go out almost every day when we have the chance, and of course the numbers to run the trip. Winter is the most difficult time because we have quite heavy rains and the weather tends to be quite unstable. Of course, rain has a big effect on the visibility. And as we rely quite a lot on the use of observers on land, that can be quite tricky. But it's now about 3 years that we are running trip all year long. And yeah, also in winter it's totally possible to go out. Actually, it's not that cold. The temperature in the islands never goes lower than 10 degrees or so. For sure, it's a different experience to deal with the weather in those months, let's say.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine it can get a little bit wet and wild out there. And you said that the visibility affects the lookout's ability to spot whales and dolphins. Does it affect your visibility while you're on the boat to spot them close up as well?
Oh yeah. The thing is that most of the time the rain spells they pass by. So in some trips you might have a visibility that is changing a lot. That's what happens, especially when we in the winter months when the weather tends to be a little bit more unstable. But yeah, of course, on the boat we might have the same situation. So of course, if we have the direction to travel and we get to the area where we have to be before that the visibility changes, everything goes smooth. Sometimes we have to work our way out there and look for the animals from the boat perspective. Sometimes we have the island completely covered by the clouds when this happens. It doesn't happen really often, such a situation, because of course the lookouts, being there 1 hour in advance, are always advising us on the weather conditions. So if we have very uncomfortable waves out there and the weather conditions are not suitable to run the trip, we just call it off and either refund the visitors or schedule another trip. So they have a double function, not only the one to find the animals, but also to assess the weather conditions. Because sometimes, of course, weather might seem really good, but the high winds and the direction of the winds might change a lot of the sea conditions, for example. So it's very good to have this, let's call it a real-time meteor station looking out there, because it almost ensures the success of the trip. I mean, you really count on one hand the trips that are not going well in terms of weather out there, because we can decide on the moment.
Great, thanks Lorenzo for that information. And got another sort of technical question from Sue here, who says, how many passengers do you take on these boats?
Okay, before it was a 12 capacity on the smaller Zodiac that we have, and on the other Zodiacs we have 28 seats capacity. But of course, at the moment, this has been reduced at 2/3. So it's 8 on the smaller vessel, and on the other vessels is 18.
Great. And how do you, as a guide, make sure that every one of those passengers gets their own kind of unique experience and gets their own information. Is there a way that a technique to engage with all those different people on board the boat?
Well, let's say that, as I mentioned before, our briefing are quite comprehensive, and during the briefing, I mean, we have this size of a boat that is already allowing for quite a direct relationship between the skipper and the guide of the boat, and the guest on board. And every briefing is run by the skipper and the guide that are actually on that boat. So it's not like if we have multiple boats going out, we have the guide and the skipper running the briefing for the particular group of guests. And of course, I mean, the boats at the end of the day, they are not really large. It's always you have a direct contact with the guests on board. And of course, we strongly incentivize to ask questions. There is, of course, a debriefing after the trip in which we offer some tea locally produced on the island, and we answer all the questions that might be there from our guests. So we always try to make sure that everybody is not shy to ask anything during or after the trip. And in many cases, even we receive pictures from them, or we share pictures with them. We have several social media channels where we share what happened during the trips and the information about the animals, of course. So we always try to make sure that we pass several messages during the trip, and yeah,
That's brilliant.
that's how we deal with it.
That's great. And it's so important to have that follow-up contact with those passengers, isn't it? Through social media or sharing. Yeah, it's excellent. It's really, really great. Okay, got another couple of questions coming in. So Victor says, what are the most common whale species in your whale watching?
So as I mentioned in the briefing, absolutely is the sperm whale. Even though sometimes with the terms whale is a little bit confusing, but sperm whales are around the islands generally sighted all year long. Once again, there are no boundaries here. We know that the animals, they move between the islands, they move to the north coast. There are some individuals that have been identified. Unfortunately, a couple of years ago, a couple of juveniles got killed in a boat strike in Canary Island, and they were identified here in the Azores. But the sperm whales, yes, are the most commonly sighted species of whale. During the spring, the situation changes quite dramatically because we have a large number of baleen whales passing through the island, and the most commonly seen species is definitely the fin whale, followed by blue whale. But once again, it's a very dynamic environment, and also in terms of season, we already observed in all these series of data that we have changes. And we have observed sei whales, humpback whales, and fin whales even in December, January sometime. So let's say that during the months of April and May, you have a good chance to see fin whales and blue whales, that's for sure. But yeah, other species like sei whale, it's a little bit more complicated to define season, probably going towards the summer. And actually in summer and autumn, sei whale is the main species of baleen whales that is possible to see, on top of course of sperms. Actually last year we had several encounters in summer also with Brutus whales, but once again, that's more like a tropical species that is less frequently observed here.
That's great. And you mentioned that you was noticing some changes in the patterns or the appearance of different species. Do you have any ideas of what might be causing those changes?
Wow, big question. I think future studies will be looking into this because there is already some research that is starting on the potentially the effect of climate change on distribution of cetacean species, but it's very, very difficult to answer a question like this. I believe it could be related to the prey availability, because sometimes, quite often, actually, we observe the animals foraging. So sometimes even at the surface. And during the spring, we have this bloom of phytoplankton. The waters are super green around the island, and there is a lot of primary production. There is a lot of krill available for the animals. So on the way to the feeding grounds, baleen whales in particular tend to stop over here to forage. But I guess if there is not the same abundance of phytoplankton or krill, they would probably skip and go in another place. So it's very difficult to look at this time series, and actually there is a lot of modeling involved. And as far as I know now, the Monistat project is also looking into analyzing this time series to try to guess what is going on from the point of view of the movements of these animals.
That's great. And it really shows the importance of those long-term data sets, doesn't it? You really need long term to see those kind of behavioral changes over those timescales. So that's great. Thanks, Lorenzo. And I've got a couple of really great questions that are around responsible practices and avoiding disturbance. So I'll go with the first one first. So Janine actually asks, how have you had to think about and deal with the use of drones in your working practices to consider disturbance issues?
That's a great question. Actually, I've been working with drones throughout my PhD and my academic career, and I'm still working with them, actually collaborating with some different projects. I work in several countries with them, and all different countries, they have different guidelines. So I found very important since the beginning, especially using drones to look at the behavior about the animals. Of course, you don't want to influence the behavior of an animal flying on top of it. Otherwise, you would be observing a behavior of an animal that is affected by your presence. So I found it really important to understand the threshold and the perfect altitude where to fly the drone, try not to cause any, I wouldn't even call it disturbance, but change in behavior of the animal. So we actually published several papers on the matter, on bottlenose dolphins and humpback whales, and some other papers that come out recently with common dolphins, for example. So in the terms of disturbance of the use of drones, really matters a lot the type of drone that is being used. The one that we use at the moment, it's less than 500 grams. It's really small. But there is several research done with other models that are slightly larger. And we found with bottlenose dolphin, for example, that at 25 meters, we didn't observe any response in our study. But down at 10 meters, with a pretty large drone, about 2.5 kilos, the animals were changing direction more often. They were turning on the side to look at it, and they were sometimes tail slapping. So there was an effect there. Well, it's a very good question, and it's very important for a number of scientific application of these tools, because they are great for measuring the animals. They are great for looking at their behavior. You can see an amount of different behaviors that is very difficult to spot with the boat. And you don't actually need to be there with the boat, actually, because you just send the drone at 500 meters away, and it's almost like observing them, but not really being there. But of course, we need to understand the best altitude to avoid altering their behavior. It's really important. And also for recreational use. So I strengthen the point that we put in the disclaimer. Myself, for example, I'm certified pilot from the civil aviation in Australia, and I run more than 120 hours of surveys on citations in my career, and I always apply for permit from the local aviation authority when it's needed to run this kind of operation. So it's very important to understand that we have the potential to affect their behavior, as we do have this potential with boats. So they are really sensitive to noise. So it's important to be careful and precautionary in our approach.
Yeah, that's great. It's very important to look at, like you said, local legislation, because those rules really do differ all around the world. But the more research that's been done, like yourself, on the impacts of these different activities is only going to help better our understanding and make sure that they're happening in a way that is responsible and reduces disturbance. So that's great. And following on from that, Lorenzo, I've got a question from Laura, similar kind of stream. So Laura says, how do you make sure that the whale watching is sustainable and does not influence the cetacean's behavior?
Wow. Making sure, it's quite a big word. I mean, when we are looking at the behavior of cetacean, it's always quite complex because unlike other species of animals like birds or land mammals, the clue that we can look at to understand if there is an effect from our presence are different and a bit more complicated to understand from our perspective, especially. So there is a lot of literature in the past 30 years about the effects of whale watching that has been published on scientific journals. It's peer-reviewed, and most of these studies are quite solid in terms of the setup, and they spend countless hours observing the animals in absence of activity and in presence of both. So we know that there are some important things to look at when we approach the whales and the dolphins. And I can say that the guidelines that, for example, WCA promoted are taking really in account all this scientific information. It's complicated to generalize these guidelines to such a big amount of species and places that might be different, might be having a different importance for the animals. But following these guidelines, I think it's already a good step forward. Then it's always about understanding different situations, because the number of boats can be having an influence, the speed of boat. We have recent very interesting papers about the noise produced by whale watching boats that is really dependent on the speed of the boat, for example. And of course, the positioning of the boat near the animals play a big role. And I would also say the exposure level. So here, for example, as an hard law in the region of the Azores, we can stay with a group of animals a maximum of 30 minutes. But I admit that sometimes we left the area before because we saw that the animals were showing some patterns like tail slapping and moving more erratically, for example. So we left them alone just at the first signs of disturbance. I think this is extremely important, especially for activities that are more invasive, like swimming with dolphins. It's very important to look at these clues and learn how to understand situation by situation what to do and how to behave. In general, first rule, give them space. I think that's the golden rule, and they need space a lot.
Thanks, Lorenzo. That's great. And it's like you said, it's a big question that we could probably spend at least another webinar talking about. And you know, there's lots of variations around the world and the species, like you mentioned. I think a good message is precautionary, giving them space, like you said. So yeah, great message. And we're actually coming up to time now. So we're at 6 o'clock in the UK here. It might be different where you are. And that's when we said we 5 for you guys. That's when we said we would draw it to a close. There are a couple of unanswered questions here. So if we haven't got to your question, feel free to drop me an email at sophie.lewis@worldcetaceanalliance.org, and I'll make sure that myself or Lorenzo gets back to you as soon as possible and try and answer your question. So that, yeah, please do follow up with us, because we'd really happily do that for you. Lorenzo, any closing comments or remarks before I end the session for us all?
No, thank you so much for hosting us today. And well, of course, if you have further questions, I will be happy to provide you an answer. Of course, if I have it, if they are too complicated, there is not always an answer.
Very true.
So thank you so much again.
Thanks, Lorenzo, and thank you all for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure to do these virtual whale watching trips this week, and I know we've all really enjoyed Lorenzo's trip. If it's inspired you about guiding, whale watching guiding, or even any type of wildlife guiding, and you want to find out more or up your skills in that area, we're running these events to promote our new training courses, which are online, and they're responsible whale watching guide courses. So please check them out. You can find those on the WCA website if you look under the Get Involved tab, and there's more information there. But please contact us if you have any questions at all, and do sign up to the course if it's inspired you. Otherwise, please check out the rest of our webinars that are happening this week, and we'll be putting recordings of all of these online as well in the coming days. So thanks everyone. Have a nice evening, rest of your day, wherever you are in the world. It's been so great. Thanks everyone. Bye, Lorenzo.
Bye. Thank you. Ciao.